the 1-minute warning and 2-minute warnings. You are being recorded if you did not already hear that in your audio, and this will also be put on our website at the end of this meeting. So thank you everybody who has joined. We look forward to the conversation today. Just to keep, we'll go ahead and go into the agenda. To get us started, we're going to be welcoming you to what we are, who's behind the Vision Zero plan, the project team, and we will be discussing kind of where we're at in the action plan, an overview of the action plan, and how you can help us achieve Vision Zero. We envision this webinar as an opportunity to provide feedback with multiple times to pause, ask if anybody has any questions, and we will have the chat function and or the Q&A function enabled for you at that time for those opportunities. So just we'll let you know how it's going, how the best to manage those conversations going here in about 15 minutes. So we'll take pauses about every 15 minutes. We'll go ahead and keep going, and I'll introduce you to the team. As I mentioned, we have Betty Smoot-Madison, the recently promoted Deputy Commissioner of Strategy and Planning. So kudos to Betty. I'm the Vision Zero manager. I've been here for almost 4 months and helping manage this project. Since then, Betty was handling it before her as a one-woman shop, an amazing one at that. We're joined by our tool design and Blue Cypress consulting team group and our VHB consulting team. Chris Polisi, who's leading the project on tool, with Byron Rushing, Omar Peters, Stephanie Brody on the tool design team, with Amanda Hatton, Ansley Belton as part of the Blue Cypress team. And I think Andy Clark is on the call from tool, as is Ian Hamilton from VHB. So thank you, project team, for being here and managing this project from here for the past year. So here's what we want to do: is we want you to share your questions. We are aware that the Q&A function is not showing right now. If it is showing for anybody as an attendee and it's just not showing for a panelist, please raise your hand or use the raise your hand function and let us know if it is there. If not, we will be opening up the chat function for you to use as it as well. I see one hand raised, so and I can't tell who the person is that raised their hand. But that is a good sign that you can see the Q&A function. Terry Ross, I'll let Terry, I'm gonna put you off of mute. Can you let me know if you see the Q&A function or the chat function?
Yeah, what I see is the chat function.
Okay, got it. Thank you. We just wanted to double check that. So we will be using the chat function, not the Q&A function, for all questions. Send the chat to hosts and panelists or to one of the co-hosts, and we will make sure that we answer those during our pauses and breaks. You can also contact us directly. We have an online form at www.atlvision0.com, or you can email us at atldot@atlantaga.gov. And then, of course, as always, feel free to throughout, your engagement process with the city is important. Contact your representatives, your city council people, your MPU chairpersons, and ATLDOT, the commissioner, and this team. We're always welcome feedback, and we've done a lot of hard work to do good public engagement for this project already. So we still want to hear from you and want you to be advocates for a Vision Zero going forward. Next slide. All right, so I'll let Betty kick this off, since she has been here kind of throughout the past 5 to 6 years of us getting to Vision Zero.
Thanks, Cole. And again, I'll just reiterate what Cole said. We do apologize about the Q&A feature not being visible right now. That definitely was not our intent, but definitely if you have questions as we go through the slides, please place them in the chat and we'll be sure to circle around to those questions at those intermittent periods for Q&A. We are really at a very exciting point in this process. We are less than 30 days away from having a final of our very first official Vision Zero action plan. And it has been long awaited. We adopted Vision Zero by ordinance in 2020, and literally at the beginning of a pandemic. And it was also at the beginning of the department, the City of Atlanta Department of Transportation, being stood up as an organization. So, so now that we've had a few years to kind of work through the kinks of standing up this brand new organization and really focus on some of our strategies in our One Atlanta Strategic Transportation Plan, the timing really is right for us to really dive into developing this Vision Zero action plan, which is focused on eliminating serious injuries and fatal crashes and developing specific strategies for making our streets safer for all. So we kicked off this process in October of last year and are scheduled to wrap things up, as I mentioned before, by the end of this month. So, and then after that, it's really going to be time for us to focus on implementing the actions that have been identified in this report, that have been collectively created by the general public, by our Vision Zero Task Force, and other city agencies, as well as ATLDOT. So we are really at, as I said, a very exciting time in this process. We thank you for your participation to date, and we hope that you continue to stay engaged with us as we start to implement. Next slide, and I will turn it back to Cole.
Yeah, so thank you, Betty. The planning process has been, you know, pretty intensive and focused and strategic. As you can understand, we have a large and diverse city as Atlanta. We've tried to get out to the community as a whole. But essentially, we looked at updating the high injury network, creating a safe streets checklist, and engage with the community during the first half of the planning process. And then we've worked on creating an action and implementation plan and evaluation framework. That also included some additional pop-up meetings, some additional MPU briefings in communities of concern, which we'll go over in a little bit, and providing more pop-ups like we were at Atlanta Streets Alive this past week. And we now are going to be presenting to you the draft plan for our Vision Zero action plan. Next slide. Additionally, we had a Atlanta Vision Zero task force. We had multiple stakeholders and partners, internal city departments, regional, state, county, and regional partners involved, transit partners, hospital and trauma center partners, community advocates and organizations, and community improvement districts, all as a part of helping us create a Vision Zero plan, because we know that Vision Zero is not done in a vacuum. It's not just the responsibility of just transportation DOT engineers, but it's a responsibility for everybody for us to be able to do a safe system approach of Vision Zero. Next slide. So in addition to the task force, where we had 5 different task force meetings, we also reached out to community partners to share the information and to provide some feedback on what concerns that they've had with getting around and mobility and safety in our city. So we just wanted to recognize some of these community partners now and say thank you for helping us get to where we are today. Next slide. And one of the big things we wanted to announce today is that we are looking to try to get to Vision Zero by 2040. We did a feasibility analysis and combination with our actions and our timelines for completing those actions. In addition to our City of Atlanta capacity to do this work, we are committed to reaching Vision Zero by 2040. One of the big advantages of finding a date and kind of saying let's go for this is it also helps us with some messaging as well, and get more commitment from our leaders, both at the city and the state. And 2040 is a date that we're really looking at because the mayor's office is been focused on the year of the youth this year. And in 2040, we will be driving, what we envision is being driving on drastically different streets in 2040. And if you think about the year of the youth, that means that any child that is born in 2023 or 2024 will be driving on drastically different streets. They will be riding their bikes on drastically different streets as teenagers. They will be walking on drastically different streets. They will be scooting on drastically different streets. So we're excited about the opportunity to reach Vision Zero and the commitment to reach Vision Zero by 2040. Next slide. I'm passing this off to Chris.
Thanks, Cole. Yeah, so we're excited to share with you some draft material from the draft action plan. We're in the process of finalizing it, working with the city and our task force partners. So we're going to walk through some of the sections, and I'll review sort of the intro material and then pass it on to the rest of my team to dive into some of the material that we haven't shared with the public to date yet. So we've been busy working on those sections since we've previously met. Next slide. So as I said, the draft action plan, it's looking to, we're going to be finalizing it this month and then hopefully be adopted by the city of Atlanta shortly thereafter. Next slide. The action plan will include a letter from the mayor. This is important because it shows the dedication of this action plan from the top, as this action plan is not just impacting the work that ATLDOT does, but it actually will impact the work that a lot of different city agencies do. So the fact that the mayor is endorsing this plan means that a lot of agencies will be working together to ensure its successful implementation. Next slide. The introduction of the action plan will sort of set the stage for its implementation, for strategies, ways of measuring progress. And we've discussed these before, but they're important to highlight. The conventional approach on how our streets have been designed, what dictated the design of our streets today versus the Vision Zero approach. So the conventional approach just accepted traffic deaths as an inevitable consequence of doing business, that, you know, people driving have near perfect behavior, that collisions can be prevented, and that everyone has an individual responsibility on the street, and that saving lives is inexpensive. However, the Vision Zero approach just turns that completely around. We expect people to make mistakes, but at the end of the day, that mistake shouldn't preclude you from returning home to your families that night. So that is sort of the guiding principles and what will guide the conversation here. Next slide. Our engagement strategy, we wanted to look at reaching out to members of the community who are most impacted by traffic violence. The communities of concern, they were determined through a myriad of factors, including car ownership, access to health insurance, household income, dependence on transit, race, among many other factors. So those communities are highlighted here, and our engagement efforts has focused on reaching to those communities. Next slide. We've hosted a myriad of events. We've had wonderful one-on-one conversations with hundreds of members of the community at each of our 4 pop-up events that we hosted throughout the city. We had a citywide in-person workshop in June in which we had a very meaningful dialogue with that community about how traffic violence has impacted their lives. In addition, we've had over 2,800 individual comments submitted through our online map, as well as we've had these virtual information sessions that you're attending tonight to complement those efforts and provide status updates on the development of the plan. Next slide. We've also performed a data analysis, which we presented at our June virtual info session. Just recapping those efforts. The high injury network, which you'll hear a lot tonight, the HIN. It's about 10% of our city streets, but consists of 73% of our roadway fatalities and serious injuries. Next slide. In addition to the high injury network, where we looked back at where crashes occur, we also look forward to see what characteristics of streets that experience crashes and and serious injuries, what characteristics also appear on other streets around the city. And that's sort of looking forward at the high risk network. Combined, we get our combined risk networks that combined both historical and looking forward to where future crashes may occur, and create this comprehensive network of city streets that will be the focus of the action plan. Next slide. I will now hand it over to my colleague Omar, who's going to discuss the Safer Streets checklist he has prepared.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. So very briefly going to go over the Safer Streets checklist part of the plan. I might be biased, but I think this is one of the most exciting parts of the plan, because it really talks to how does the city get to making these streets drastically different, as Cole mentioned. So there are two pieces to those steps. The first is the education guide, and we really see this as an external facing piece of the plan. It is attached to the plan as an appendix, and the goal is to really show city staff, elected officials, and the greater Atlanta community, yourself and road users, what are the changes to the streets that could be made. If you hit next, Rachel. The second piece of that is also a selection tool. It's more of internal facing, but it's information for city staff, the planners, the engineers, the people who are planning and designing the roads, of what they will be doing, or how do they make changes to the streets to make them safer. We hit next slide. So we'll be spending time on the education guide, since that's really the piece that you'll be seeing, and really the piece that's really trying to understand what are the changes to the streets that we made. So it covers the safety countermeasures to address the city's most common crash types. So Chris mentioned looking at that data and identifying the high crash locations. So it's taking that information and identifying what needs to be done to the street. The goal is to create a shared understanding, so everyone involved, again, from everyone from the road user, the overall community, city staff, elected officials, everyone to be able to understand what to do to the street and what are those changes. So it contains over 50, sorry, not over, but exactly 50 safety countermeasures. And those include things like, if we hit next, protected intersections, which is creating spaces for people to be able to bike and make turns, and people driving to make turns, making those slower and creating places where everyone will be able to cross the street or cross the intersection. Road diets, which is taking parts of the road, that road space that the city has ability to, and creating places where more people are able to use the road. Raised intersections, increasing the height of crossings at the sidewalk level, so that it slows motorists to safer speeds, and then increases the visibility of people who are trying to cross the road. And then traffic circles, again, creating those safer speeds for motorists as they're traveling through the intersection, and being able to allow space for more people to use the road. The next piece of it is also identifying what are the countermeasures, the safety countermeasures, if you hit next, Rachel, that city staff will be deploying across the city. So looking at proactively understanding that these are countermeasures based on national research that really address the types of issues, the crash types that are being experienced across the city. So these are places where, these are safety countermeasures where they'll be deployed across the city at different places. Includes things like leading pedestrian intervals, so making that changes to the signals so that people crossing are able to get that ability to cross first before motorists are making those turns. So really establish their presence in the street. Slip lane closures to make more space for people to make safer turns. Making sure that sidewalks, if there's any sidewalk gaps in the city, making sure those are filled. Lighting, again, very important to make sure that people are able to use the road safely and able to see each other. Bus stop improvements, making sure that places for people taking transit are able to access transit very easily, and also have space to wait, safe places to wait. And then daylighting or restricting parking at intersections, creating a place where people driving are able to see the intersection more fully, to see everyone who's using that space. So again, these are countermeasures going back to the HIN that the city will first deploy across the HIN. So you'll be seeing those, likely be seeing these in communities across the city, and then applying them to other places like the HIN where they're likely to be high crash risk factors, and creating a safer space throughout. So as Cole mentioned, these are really trying to identify how to create those drastically different streets so that there are safer places for everyone traveling. I believe now we'll pause for a Q&A.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the comments so far. We've been responding to a few of them in the chat already, but we do have a few that have not been responded to in the chat. Betty and I are going to be answering some of these questions, so I'll probably use this as an opportunity to read the question, and then either Betty or I will answer them. So Christine asked the question, are there plans to add more speed tables and roundabouts to the streets, or plans to increase the number of roads that could get speed tables? I'll go ahead and answer that. I think Omar's presentation, because this question came in right before Omar's, the answer is yes. This is increasing the number of locations and opportunities where we can best align countermeasures such as roundabouts, such as speed tables, at appropriate locations, and use that as a measure to slow speed and to make it safer for people walking and biking and using our city streets.
And I'll add to that, Cole, just, one of the fortunate things, I think we're in a great position right now. Many of you voted on our Moving Atlanta Forward T-SPOS and bond program. And within that, there is an allocated amount of funding for strategic traffic calming and neighborhood traffic calming. So that gives us some access to funding to be able to implement, based on some of the data that we've collected as a part of this process, as it relates to our high injury network, as well as some of the public input that we've received. So definitely, as Cole said, the answer is yes. And over the last few years, we have made adjustments to some of our city code to be able to enable us and authorize us to be able to do certain types of strategic traffic calming on all of our roadways, instead of just being limited to, your neighborhood streets or even minor collectors. So those are some things that we were able to do over the past couple of years.
Awesome, thank you, Betty. Another question is, how will you involve GDOT for unsafe state roads? That's from Haralambos. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Betty, do you want to answer that one?
I can't yet. How have we involved GDOT? So one, GDOT has been a part of our Vision Zero task force. So they have been at the table and a part of these conversations related to the development of this action plan. And they have weighed in as well on some of the strategies and actions that are in here. And then we regularly coordinate with GDOT on various levels. There's leadership levels and coordination meetings that happen across Commissioner McMurray as well as our commissioner. But then there's also district level and engineering level coordination that happens between ATLDOT and GDOT. And then even at our safety teams level, we have recurring monthly meetings between GDOT safety team and ATLDOT safety team. So there is a lot of coordination that happens between us. And we've made a lot of strides in building that relationship and making sure that GDOT understands our priorities as far as safety and Vision Zero. And we look forward to continuing to work with them again and keeping them engaged in our task force as well as other project specific coordination.
I'm going to read at least one more Q&A. We do have more, but we want to make sure we get through some of the presentations, and maybe I'll leave more time for Q&A afterwards. Vanessa, last question here before we jump back in. She said, this is exciting. Will roadways that are on the docket for repaving incorporate these strategies moving forward? I think the quick answer to that is yes. I think our LMIG program, which is our street resurfacing program, and if you haven't already been in downtown in the past few months, we've been incorporating safe streets Envision Zero into resurfacing projects already. We have an internal engineering team that helped redesign that. We partnered with Central Atlanta Progress to create the MLK cycle track, but we were able to implement bicycle facilities and some safe street designs into the resurfacing in downtown. And we're going to continue to do that with other projects, and we're going to build the capacity internally to do so. I'm going to go ahead and move on from this portion of the Q&A just to keep us going. If you haven't heard your question answered yet, we will answer it during the next two Q&A sessions. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to start talking. Thank you, Cole, for the Q&A session, and thank you, team, for having this tonight. This is great. I saw somewhere in one of the questions how will this get done, and I think this implementation plan, this chapter of the final report, is the steps by which that will happen. Another comment I saw in there is, why set a hard deadline for 17 years, 16 years starting next year? Why can't we just do these things? And I, at the risk of speaking up from experience, the efforts, it took us generations to get to the streets that we have today. It took decades to achieve this. City of Atlanta, like Rome, was not built in a day, and it took a while to get here. And it'll take time to undo some things and change some things and envision and implement some new things in the city streets. And this implementation plan really takes that into effect. What we've seen in a lot of cities for Vision Zero achievement around the country and around the world is kind of an S curve, a slow, gradual growth while a program gets stood up, started, underway, funds are identified, design changes are made. It takes time to go through engineering drawings and develop projects, and then a sharp, dramatic increase in safety as those projects get implemented, and the safe speeds, the safe roads, the safe infrastructure takes hold and really starts to change the culture and the driving behaviors and the crashes in a city. And then kind of a slow, gradual tail at the end of this, where there's really persistent, challenging locations take time to address and maybe tremendously expensive to achieve. But all of this is to say that getting started as soon as possible really, really matters. And the near-term efforts that we're recommending in this plan are really focused around the front end of achieving this implementation. Building staff capacity. A couple of people at the City of Atlanta, a city of 500,000 people and hundreds more thousands of daily commuters and residents and visitors for all different kinds of things. A couple of people can't take that on simultaneously. We need full staff capacity for planners, engineers, community outreach specialists, and lots of other skills that are going to come along with standing up this program and getting this on the streets. Beyond that, I think we have identified a number of factors that can be addressed quickly, and deploying low-cost solutions in places that make the most sense, where operations, signal timing, inexpensive design treatments can really start to chip away at some of the most egregious and easy to address locations in the city. And those will take time, and they will take resources. So does the city have the tools, physically tools they need, and the skills they need to get solutions out there on the street this week, next month, and over the course of the next year to really identify some critical questions? And then finally, getting started on some of those big intractable problems. Someone has asked about GDOT. Coordination with the state government will take time. They have different design standards, and they will need different questions answered. And getting a lot of those projects started, going through the early engineering phases that are needed to understand the full safety and mobility outcomes and implications of projects will take time. And building them on some of the bigger and more difficult streets in the city will take time along that high energy network. So we took these three near-term efforts and then projected them out with input from many of the people on the call tonight, both from citizens in the city as well as city staff, and our national peers elsewhere in the country, to say, what are some of these categories we need to tackle? Transformative actions about changing the city program, addressing the high injury network, dealing with policy and planning, the rules that underlie decisions made in the city, addressing some of the systemic safety, the reoccurring challenges that may be off the high injury network, but we see over and over and over again as being problems, dealing with equity and communities of concern and helping them have a full voice in this process to ensure that resources are allocated equitably and fairly, dealing with enforcement. At the end of the day, many of these Rules are enforced by laws, and so we need to have a fair and equitable way to deal with enforcement that is done strategically and effectively, and does not overly burden communities who are already burdened in the transportation system. And then hopefully the culmination of a lot of these things work for culture change and really start to change the way that people think about driving in Atlanta. And it's not just one around frustration, speeding, being stuck in traffic, and some of the even like kind of memes that we tell about our city and traffic. But we really start to get to an idea that people say, I can walk or bike safety in the city without a lot of extra thought or a lot of extra decisions that need to get made. And then finally, this has been really oriented around data and transparency and sharing those things. So we're going to click through 2 slides briefly. One, and I encourage everyone to look at the final plan and look at some of the implementation core values around leadership, commitment, equity, and achieving safer speeds and safer designs. Next slide. And then the projects that make, the elements that make great projects. Do they reduce the high injury network? Do they address concerns within communities of concern? Do they establish a modal hierarchy to put pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders in a safe position everywhere they travel? And then incorporate proven safety countermeasures, as Omar mentioned. Next slide. And together, all of these things wrapped up into, we have about 90 different actions for the plan. Some of them are near term, some of them are immediate actions, some of them will take years to develop. And we've really tried to stage and stagger those throughout the plan so that the citizens of the city can see where the city is moving and what the city's actions are taking, and where the city are making decisions, and the city staff can get guided in the right path towards Vision Zero. So that is the end of my section, and I appreciate everyone reading through this. We have a lot of words in this chapter, and we will need thoughtful responses to many of them from many of the people on this call.
Yeah, thank you, Byron. Very, very helpful. I think implementation is the key part of this. We can talk about planning. We're, I think, a city that's good on planning. We're about to be a city that's good on implementation due to the hard work here and the input that we're getting back from the public. If you haven't already seen in the chat, there was a question about the high injury network update that was mentioned. We just put in the chat the response about a 5-year period of analysis and how we weighted crashes. And there's a link to the high injury network if you want to look at that more. I would recommend looking at that after the meeting because we're trying to get your undivided attention for the meeting, but definitely feel free to look at that. It's also on our ATLDOT Vision Zero website. A couple more questions. The question was, very glad to see LPIs. This is from Noah. LPIs in the closing of slip lanes and the recommendations were leading intervals for bicycle signals also considered. I'll just quickly answer this. Yes, leading bicycle intervals for dedicated bicycle signals are definitely part of it. We kind of are incorporating that into our leading pedestrian interval and our policies that are going to go into signal timing. So leading bicycle intervals will also be included and is one of the names of my former Biketober teams, leading bicycle interval. Ed Cadell asked the question, or seconded question, Vanessa's question before about resurfacing, about can these be required for all resurfacing? Can Vision Zero be required for all resurfacing? Yes, I mean, that's the intent of finalizing this plan, is that, you know, from here into perpetuity, our projects that we are implementing as ATLDOT will have Vision Zero as the most important aspect, the key factor in the design. So if there is a future resurfacing that's happening in the near future, our engineering teams will be looking at those and making design changes based on the opportunities that we see fit. That also goes for currently designed. It will be a little bit more difficult for certain capital projects, but as capital projects are currently designed, we will be taking a hard look at existing capital projects and where can we provide improvements upon those in the near term, and then recommendations in the longer term to fix those. Other questions, let's see, we answered the first question about high injury network. Last question, which I think is a really good question, is a little bit based on the relationship between land use and transportation, from Terry Ross. Including these tree changes, into the comprehensive development plan can create funding paths for the projects in the MPU. I'm assuming that's a question on whether or not those can create funding paths as a part of the comprehensive development plan. Betty, feel free to jump in here, but I think the long and the short of it is that we are collaborating with the Department of City Planning and their comprehensive development plan, and incorporating the feedback that they're going to be getting, and we'll be actually out and engaging with the community with our Department of City Planning partners. And we will be incorporating that into our upcoming comprehensive transportation plan that we'll be doing. And then this Vision Zero plan is a framework and a visioning for both of those plans as we move forward for a more walkable, livable city. So I don't know if Betty, you wanted to say anything else specific to that.
That was great. I don't have anything further to add.
Oh, great. And then actually just got in this one, so I'll go ahead and answer it. Jennifer Brooks asked the question, are projects prioritized for the most dangerous spots are fixed ASAP? So yes and no. The answer is yes, in the sense that yes, the most dangerous spots we want to fix as soon as possible, but it also takes, a little bit of engineering. It takes people to get out there to fix them. So ASAP is a we're going to have to pick and choose some battles on where we go, and that's actually where our communities of concern list and communities comes into play, and doing it equitably as well. We can't send, if we only have a team of let's say 8 people to do a quick fix, we can't send them out to 20 different locations at the same time. But we can prioritize that list, and we're going to be prioritizing it based on the communities of concern, so that we're helping out communities that are most vulnerable first, and working back kind of from that standpoint. I'm going to go ahead and pause there. We'll move on to the next section, and then we'll finish up with the final QA. Thank you.
All right, so this section is talking about the evaluation framework. So after we've planned and started implementing, how do we know what our progress is? So we want to track our progress and then learn how and where to adjust based on what we've done. So we want to understand which interventions are effective in order to reduce crashes and fatalities, and what traffic safety threats remain as the Vision Zero actions are implemented throughout the city. This information can then be used in decisions like where to direct investments and which projects should be done first. So some of that prioritization. There are 2 parts in the tracking progress. In tracking progress, the first is evaluating projects and the impacts of those projects. The second is monitoring the Vision Zero program as a whole. So in the evaluation framework, the city looks at the overall performance of projects. This has a safety component, and can also look at safety surrogates like near misses in order to understand the efficacy of the interventions. For program monitoring, Atlanta can track the crashes that are occurring, and the level and types of investments that are happening over time. Next slide, please. For project performance, we're looking at the overall performance of the project based on a number of city goals. The current before-after study pilot evaluation approach is based on goals from the Atlanta Strategic Transportation Plan and the Downtown Repaving Project. There are a set of 8 performance measures that you can see in the table here. They are also considered KPIs, or key performance indicators, that are calculated and weighted before, during, and after the construction of a project is completed. Next slide, please. For safety KPIs, we need 3 to 5 years of crash data to reliably understand the impacts of a project. So for a shorter term evaluation approach, we're able to use surrogate measures like near miss analysis. These use videos to capture before and after at the project location in order to study the interactions of road users, even when there haven't been crashes. For instance, in the top picture here, you can see 2 cars entering an intersection. You can see their speed and also their path of travel. And in the bottom picture, you can see a photo a screen capture from those videos of a motorist and a person on a bicycle in close proximity. So from these videos, we're able to calculate how many times road users interact in ways that could possibly cause a crash. Next slide, please. In addition to evaluating individual projects, we also want to monitor how the whole program is doing, how the whole network is doing based on the program, the Vision Zero program. There are a set of KPIs, those key performance indicators, that the city will use to track progress over time, and they're shown here. ATLDOT tracks the number of crashes occurring on the roadways and then analyzes them we've analyzed them as Chris discussed earlier. The number of crashes by mode and severity are critical metrics in understanding the path towards zero fatalities and serious injuries. Also, the dollar spent on projects and the number of projects that are addressing crashes is a KPI that we want to understand, and that allows the city to actually track the implementation of the program. And finally, the locations of the crashes is important and will be shown on the dashboard map, the Vision Zero dashboard map. And I'll pass it to Cole, who will talk about the dashboard that ATLDOT is developing.
Yeah, so thanks, Stephanie. So with some of those key performance indicators, we are piloting our dashboard right now, and we're planning to have this go live for the launch of the Vision Zero plan. This is a screenshot of that dashboard, and this will be interactive where you can toggle on fatalities, serious injuries, bicycle, pedestrian, so you can go by mode, by severity. You could do it by year, and we'll also like to incorporate other data points for this, but essentially we want you to know as a constituent and the public that we are aware of the issue. We know that this is an endemic or a pandemic. I forget the names, the difference between the two, because we've been in a pandemic or an endemic for the past 3 or 4 years. But we're in a serious situation where fatalities have been on the rise over the past few years, and specifically pedestrian fatalities, and that we're really working towards getting it, and we're going to be tracking those numbers. We're going to be aware of it's happening, and we're going to be aware of opportunities to fix those and be kind of not just kind of transparent to the community. So that's what the dashboard kind of is looking like right now, and there'll be some minor tweaks and changes, and we'll always be welcome for feedback on what could be included in the dashboard as it continues to evolve. Next slide. So I think this should be the final Q&A, and we are excited about answering some of these final questions. We only have about 12 more minutes, but the Q&A will be not the final piece of the presentation, so we only have about 5 more minutes of Q&A. The questions that are on here that we still need to discuss, when will the 25-mile-an-hour default speed limit on many city streets be put in place? Betty, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah. So many may know or may not know, as a part of our Vision Zero ordinance back in 2020, we included language in that legislation to allow for 25 mile per hour default speed limits in the city. So we started that effort in doing a lot of changing out of signs, particularly on our local streets throughout the city. We got through much of that, but in coordination with the Georgia DOT, we realized we needed to do some additional studies for some of our more larger or major streets, such as collectors and arterials. Or streets that were on what's called a state list of roads, which is a pre-approved list of streets that enables local law enforcement to run radar enforcement on it. And so we actually have been working with GDOT very closely on this effort now to make updates to that LOR. We actually submitted about 200 different engineering traffic studies over the last 9 months or so for GDOT's approval to change the speed limits on those streets. So it's an active effort. We're working on it, and hopefully before the end of the year, we'll have an approval from GDOT on those speed limit changes. And shortly after that, we'll be able to start working on implementing.
Thank you, Betty. We have a couple more, and I want to make sure we try to get to as many as we can. Our school streets, this is from Wesley, our school streets that limit automobile traffic directly near schools under consideration, or just generally are safe routes to school for children who may be biking or walking alone being thought about? I think the short answer is yes, Betty, unless you have something else you want to say. I think we are looking at not just the routes, but actually slowing and making streets near schools as safe as possible, and using our ability to do that, coordinating with GDOT and their list of roads policies that are in place.
Yeah. And I'll just add, ATLDOT has a dedicated staff person who is our Safe Routes to School program manager, and her sole job is to work with schools and communities and students to identify preferred routes to get schools or get kids walking and biking to school, and to identify strategies to help improve those routes and make them safer, going after funding, and then implementing those strategies. So creating safe routes to school is definitely a part of this effort and a priority for ATLDOT.
Okay. I see another question here of how often will the dashboard be updated? So that's a good question. It's not, and Jim's the one who submitted that, or excuse me, Andrew's the one who submitted that question. Thanks, Andrew. That is something we're trying to figure out right now. Ultimately, just to give you guys a little bit behind the curtain, fatal crashes are reported to ATLDOT by Atlanta Police Department on a weekly basis. So we are able to update probably no earlier than once a week on our dashboard, and we're trying to figure out the best frequency for that. I think most likely is we are going to be looking at somewhere between once every 2 weeks or monthly for an update on it at the dashboard right now, but we'll continue to try to make that better. Another question here is about the dashboard is how will the dashboard and where fatalities take place inform the Vision Zero implementation plan, or is it provided for information only? And they said, thanks for your efforts. Pedestrian deaths are at a 40-year high, and this cannot come soon enough. That's from Mark. That's a good question, and it sounds like Mark read the AJC article that came out last week. Yes, pedestrian deaths are definitely at a 40-year high, and it's a problem, and we're working to solve that. I will say our data right now, knock on wood, for the city of Atlanta is below year to date of last year. So I think some of the efforts that the team has been making over the past few years is starting to get some benefits. Any fatality is a loss of life, and we consider it a tragedy, and we'll definitely be looking into making those repairs. One of the things that with every fatality from an implementation plan standpoint, or from an implementation and improvements standpoint, is that there is a fatal review crash committee that has been started through legislation by the city council that Betty and I are going to be leading and partnering with Department of City Planning, Atlanta Police Department, and others for looking into each fatal crash. And they will come with an engineering analysis about how we can improve that specific intersection. That will be included then into our plans for quick builds and quick fixes, and/or into capital projects as they see fit. And then I think Jim had excuse me, that was not Jim. Jim had a question of, is planning for bikes off the street part of the plan? Jim, I think if you don't mind clarifying what your question is. And then Jim, I think you also had a comment about a specific about where there have been some near misses and that crash data does not help give us information. Please provide the intersection you're mentioning, and then I'll try to respond once we get that. The question that Jim had specifically is that he understands the calculation of benefit based on data. However, and I have discussed this with my commissioner, is about the correct data assimilation. For example, he took pictures of many of witness crashes and didn't include near misses, and we're not always seeing those recorded correctly by the police department crash. Yeah, that's a problem for a lot of crashes specifically, but that's actually why the work that this team did to create predictive crash factors is a huge component on us deciding and prioritizing what to do. Those predictive crash factors are essentially a proxy for helping prevent future crashes and for potential near miss locations where we don't have the data on there yet. I think that that's probably the best way I can describe it. I know you mentioned a specific intersection. I'd love to hear more about that. And if Jim, you can provide that in the chat, that would be great. And then any other questions I haven't answered? Other than as Jim's responding to that, if you can, Philip Kelly asked a question: will there be any social measurements of success, such as surveying residents near high entry network roadways to get a sense of their comfort with the street, their perception of its safety before and after improvements? I think that's a really good point. As a city planner, we need to, we're trained to both think about a quantitative and qualitative feedback. And I think that qualitative feedback of the perception of safety of those streets is really important. I think engagement with our NPU process is a good way to get that data. And I think, we'll be asking the community how they feel about their feelings on those IRG networks. But do you have any thoughts about kind of surveying residents and social measurements of success?
No, I think you answered that sufficiently, Cole. Engagement is generally always a part of our process. So we definitely will look forward to, as we start working on specific projects related to Vision Zero, we will continue to engage with the communities that those locations, intersections, or corridors impact. So great point, and yes. Okay.
And then Jim, thanks for clarifying the location of where there's misinterpretation of which location. We'll dig deeper into that specific spot at Marietta Boulevard and Bolton Drive, and it being recorded as a different location. I think that's a very good point, is that every time we are going to be doing quick fixes, we have a team of experts that are going to be going into those communities and hearing both from the community on what the actual issue is based on what the data is telling us, and seeing if there's anything mismatched there. That's a key component. And then I think Jim's question, just to make sure we clarify, I think the last one that I did not get to is planning for bikes off the street part of the plan. So I think I understand that as taking bicycle facilities and creating off-street facilities as opposed to just on-street facilities. So where speeds and volumes of multimodal vehicle traffic is high, I mean, that's ultimately where separation of bikes is the key, to separate it from road users, and also to separate them sometimes from pedestrians as well. So separation of bikes is key strategy in that street design technique. It could be a trail, it could be a separated bike lane, as in what you're seeing on the MLK cycle track in South Downtown right now, or the Central Avenue bike lane, South Downtown. So separating space by space, and whether that's horizontal and or vertical is good, and it always just depends on the context. All right, I think that is it for the Q&A. I'm not seeing any other highlighted. I see one more highlighted question. Did we answer this one? I think we answered this one through the response. So I appreciate that. Thank you everybody for the Q&A. I'm going to pass it off to our team to close it out. I think Chris, you are our last speaker, and thanks everybody for joining.
All right, thank you, Cole. Yeah, I'm just closing out the session. I mean, I assume that you're all here to help us achieve Vision Zero, and it takes a village to do this. So next slide, I'm going to share with you ways that once this action plan has been published, how you can stay involved and be local champions to make sure that the city achieves zero. So first, sign the pledge, the easiest thing you could do. It's on the website. Next slide. Advocate for safe streets. This is important. Be a champion. Attend public meetings for projects that advance the goals of Vision Zero. Support city staff and elected representatives to make Vision Zero reality. And spread the word to your family, friends, and neighbors. This is very important because we need to receive public sentiment that's supportive of these projects to help them be successful. Next slide. And last but not least, stay informed. Follow ATLDOT on social media. Sign up for the email list, specifically the one we created for Vision Zero. And then also, once the dashboard goes live, make sure you monitor it to stay up to date on progress and use that to help make sure that the city is successful. So thank you, everyone, and thank you all for being part of this action plan, and we look forward to its adoption. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.